Welcome back. All right, so in my continuing look at teams that missed the playoffs this year, we're up to the Canucks. Yay! So the Vancouver Canucks. It was a long season, and it ended up being just an absolute stop and start disaster season. They end up 23-29-4, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go a little bit off where I normally go with these videos. And to the record last year against teams that were in their division this year. Last year, they had a record of 5-10 against the teams that are in their division this year. And that's the blind spot that I mentioned in the season preview for the Canucks, but I really wanted to kind of we'll just throw that under the rug a little bit, that they struggled against these teams last year and probably overachieved in the playoffs. So, right? So, anyways, they end up scoring 149 goals. Not enough goals for. 182 goals against. Too many goals against. But there were some good periods of time for the Canucks this season. There were some good runs. There always is. There's always that 110 game period you look at and you go, all right, now they've got it all figured out, and then it falls apart again. Now, for the Canucks this year, it really was a matter of them getting off to an iffy start, and then they never really quite got back on track. They were never really completely in the hunt, but they were never that far out either until Montreal picked it up, and that was while they were shut down too. So the math got really dodgy really, really fast. But there was still hope. And that's sometimes the most dangerous thing with sports. And just in general, sometimes hope can be frustrating because you allow yourself to believe things are going to get better, and then they're still the Canucks. So their power play, 17.33% this year. That's not high enough. Penalty kill, 79.56%. Also not high enough. Those two numbers add up to, 96? About 96% altogether. Almost 97. It's just, and when they're not scoring enough 5-on-5, which they didn't, it makes those numbers more prominent. And it's more problematic. But while the marketplace has gone bonkers regarding the team's future and present and all of that, I'm taking a more measured approach because you kind of sort of have to. And it's not that there's a lack of caring or a lack of frustration. It's just you have to kind of try to keep it all in perspective. There's still a good young core here in Vancouver. Their top scorer being part of it. Brock Boeser is 23 years of age. 56 games, 23 goals, 26 assists, 49 points. He's just getting into his prime now. And you've got Bo Horvat, who I do not have on the board, but he is also in his prime right now. So there are a lot of good young players on this team. And Jim Benning said he wants to bring in veteran leadership. And of course, right away, people are like, well, there's already guys over 30 that aren't producing on this team. Yeah, he wants to get rid of those guys. And it doesn't mean that you're going to be populating the entire team with guys above the age of 30. It means you're looking for the right guys. I would look at Toronto and the fact that they brought in Thornton, they brought in Spezza, and Simmons, and those are three good examples of players that came in and helped. And whether you think the Leafs are on the right track or not, the reality is those guys all came in. They're all making less money than they probably would elsewhere. And they've all been productive, and they've all helped to take some of that leadership pressure away from the younger players on the team. And so with Vancouver, that may very well be the thinking here, is Bo Horvat's the captain, but we need to give him the right supplemental players, and we don't feel like we have that right now. So underperforming contract, honestly, there are a lot of underperforming contracts, and this is where, if you're on the whole Team Fire Benning thing, this is where you have almost all of your ammo. His trades have been okay. I mean, you can tear apart a trade here and a trade there. Tyler Madden hasn't debuted for the Kings yet, so we could just hold off on that rage for now. But the contracts are definitely an issue. Pending UFAs, one I don't have here is Sven Berchi. So Sven Berchi's contract is expiring. I would expect him to probably retire. And, it is also a big-ish contract that, obviously, with him buried in the minors, means it's not getting the money's worth you would want out of it. As much as I appreciate the relationship with Utica, I don't think the Canucks want to spend $2.5 million in cap money to send a guy to Utica. Louis Eriksson is the contract that is still around the necks of the Canucks in terms of their cap. And it makes it difficult for them to look forward. And I do think the buyout happens this offseason. I predicted this the whole way through, that they would buy out Eriksson at the end of this year. Now, if they bought him out last summer, or well, last summer / fall, right? If they had bought him out then, they don't get any cap relief. In fact, it would have cost them more money under the cap to buy him out than it would have to bury him on the taxi squad or in the minors, which is what ends up happening here. Now, if they buy him out this offseason, they save $2 million under the cap. So that's important that they're able to save at least something, because this summer is going to be tricky. Honorable mentions, which I haven't done for any other team and I don't intend to, for underperforming big contract. Alex Edler, for 8 assists, they paid a lot of money. I would think that if Edler does return, and I'm okay with him returning, it'll be for a lesser role and for less money. Jay Beagle, I know Beagle isn't counted on for points. I'm okay with that, but yeah, it was not a good season for him. Antoine Roussel, and they both have the same deal of $3 million per. So this is an issue, and I think they expire at the end of next year. I find it's good in life not to look directly at the Sun or directly at the Vancouver Canucks contract situation, because they'll both make you go blind. So yeah, Beagle and Roussel, that's $6 million to them. $12 million with Edler. With Eriksson, that's what, $19 million? See, you think that with $19 million, you can get yourself like a nice Matthews and Nylander, but why would you want that when you can get 4 players for the price of 2? It's a tough sell even for me. Braden Holtby also was not a contract where they got exactly the kind of numbers from him they would have wanted. And they knew that it was going to be somewhat of a downgrade after Markstrom leaves, because Markstrom wanted the no movement clause, and if he had that, they would have had to protect him, and then they would have lost Demko to Seattle. There's no way Demko wouldn't have been picked by Seattle. So they bring in Holtby, they'll expose him. I cannot see Seattle taking him with an .889 save percentage and a $4.5 million cap hit next year. And people will say, well, yeah, but it was behind the Canucks. Right, he had an .889. Demko had a .915. So Demko's save percentage way above that produced by Holtby. Demko also ends up 16-18-1 with that .915 save percentage, 2.85 goals against. The Canucks flailing at the end of the season after flirting with respectability definitely hurts Demko's numbers. Hurt Holtby's as well. But all of these contracts tell you why people were so enraged over the return of Benning next year. But he's already said they are going to buy out contracts. They're going to utilize buyouts, and Francesco Aquilini is fine with them buying their way out of trouble. Which, as long as you replace it with the right players, is fine. So, pending UFAs, Brandon Sutter, who's already expressed an interest in returning to Vancouver. If he does, it'll be for less money. We know this. Jimmy Vesey, who I thought played okay for Vancouver, but his plus-minus in 20 games of -10 tells you he's going to the market. Travis Boyd, I think they keep Boyd. I would be very surprised if Travis Boyd doesn't re-sign and stay in Vancouver. Tyler Graovac, I thought he was decent as a fill-in, and this is where the problems for the Canucks come in. You get guys who come in and play a bottom 6 role and immediately realize you shouldn't be paying a lot of money for your bottom 6. You should have a useful bottom 6. But unless you have an identity line like the New York Islanders, where that line is absolutely lights out and fantastic most games, you really don't want to end up spending a lot of money in your bottom 6. You need fast players, which already Benning's talked about trying to get faster. And you also want guys who can put the puck in the net, which the bottom 6 for the Canucks hasn't done consistently enough. And there are charts and graphs from all over the internet that will tell you what you already know if you watch the games, that they don't get enough. There's not enough scoring depth there. So when I hear Benning talking about 3 scoring lines, I get that twitch too. You're not alone. It's just there's that nervous tick that comes out that when he talks about we need 3 scoring lines. You said that last year. So, yeah, right? Alex Edler, pending UFA. I have a feeling they'll try to bring him back. But the way that Benning talked about it in that press conference at the end of the year kind of made it sound like, we're going to talk to him. Like, we're going to tell him basically his career's done in Vancouver, kind of vibe to the way that he said it. So we'll see. Travis Hamonic, loved Hamonic with the Canucks. I really hope that he stays. And the good news is that he wants to stay in the area, so it shouldn't be a problem getting him re-signed. And there was a lot of negativity thrown at Hamonic early in the season. I never understood it. And then he gets injured and he comes back, and you see an immediate difference on that blue line. And by the end of the year, he had good chemistry with the rest of his teammates. So I'm hoping that they keep Hamonic without spending too much money to keep Hamonic. And this is where the problem is with Benning, right? Where he ends up spending just, and even if it's 500 grand too much you're spending on 4 or 5 different contracts, that adds up to $2.5 million if you do it 5 times. And this is where you see the difference between the really good GMs who get those value contracts and the ones who are spending too much money. You end up making it so that your team cannot add at the deadline, where your team has a problem and you can't spend the money you need to in order to upgrade where things need to be changed in order to improve your roster. Jalen Chatfield's a pending UFA. I don't know if the Canucks see him as part of the long-term future or not. He may return. He may not. If he doesn't return, I'm okay with that, because what we saw with the depth on the blue line, I think tells you that there's probably some good there. They do need to add somebody. I was impressed with how Nate Schmidt got better as the season went along, and I still say, and I know people are going to get mad at me, I still think Tyler Myers had a decent season. Notice I didn't put him on the underperforming big contracts. I thought he was good this year. Last year, yeah, absolutely. Could not have been more angry with him, especially at the start of the bubble playoffs. But this year I thought he was good. I thought he avoided the unnecessary penalties. I thought he did a pretty good job. The unnecessary penalties were usually Edler, and they were usually a sign of him getting a little bit slower. Restricted free agents, Cole Lind, who may very well end up being protected, may very well not be protected, and if he's not, he ends up probably being Seattle's pick. It may be Gadjevic, who I did not put on this list, because Cole Lind is seen as having more upside, and so there's a better chance of Lind being protected. Jace Hawryluk, who I thought had an up and down sort of season, but towards the end he was pretty good. I think he gets the qualifying offer. I think he stays. Mark Michaelis, I thought he was good as well. Again, showing you that in your bottom 6, you should just make sure you have players that can go out there and play, and maybe a little bit of offensive upside. He's 25 years of age, so what you see is likely what you get, but we'll see whether or not they hold on to him. Quinn Hughes is going to get a lot of money. He's going to be worth it. The offensive side of the game was fantastic to start the season, and then as the season went along, his defense got better. Towards the end, everything's falling apart for Vancouver. It's 19 games in 32 days. I did not read the tea leaves on what was going on with the players at the end of the season. I really thought that overreacting to the end of the season was a problem, because these guys were tired. And for Hughes, playing a ton of minutes, it's only his second season. And so, next year with a regular schedule and a clean slate, I think things will be better for Hughes. But they have to sign him. Ole Ulevy, who alternates between being beloved and reviled, it seems, within the fan base. I like Ulevy. I don't know that there's a top 4 potential there, but I think as a bottom 2 pairing, he's fine. I think he stays on a bridge contract, probably 2 years, probably about $1 million per, maybe $1.25 million. And sure, Benning could throw him $6 million for 6 years. Sure, he could. Yeah, he could. But Pettersson is going to get a big raise. The good or bad news of Pettersson, though, is that he didn't have a very good season and he was injured for more than half of it. So that saves the Canucks money, I would think, right? Like if he'd had a lights out season, plays all 56 games, ends up with 65 points, then they got to pay him a ton of money. But this year it didn't happen. And so I have no idea how much Pettersson's going to make this summer. I do get mildly scared because, as I've already discussed, we do see Benning overpay a little bit, but we'll see if that happens here. Key injuries. Pettersson, of course. Hamonic, when he wasn't on the blue line, you could see a huge difference. And Tyler Mott, who is an underrated bottom 6 forward for the Canucks. Again, that payment is big. But Mott, who makes less than a lot of the other guys on this team, honestly produces pretty well in his role. And he's kind of emerged as an unexpected leader on this team. So yeah, Mott, I thought, played well. Players 22 and under on this roster, not as many as you'd like to see. You have to think next year Podkolzin probably ends up on this roster. Quinn Hughes, Nils Höglander, who had an amazing season, voted the most exciting player on the team. Elias Pettersson, who, again, out for more than half the season. Hopefully he's healthy in October. It just feels like this is one of those nagging things. I really hope not. But if he has wrist problems from here, that's going to affect his shot. It's going to affect his totals. Right, it's all over the place. Oliu Levy, already talked about him. Jack Rathbone, who was an excellent addition to that blue line towards the end of the season. The silver linings are there. And Rathbone, I thought, was very good. He deserves a spot on that blue line next season. Cole Lind, already talked about him, and William Lockwood, who, again, you're going to find a split in the fandom about whether or not they think Lockwood is going to be an NHLer or if he's going to be a really good AHLer who gets calls at call-ups. So he got a cup of coffee at the end of the year. We'll see if he gets more than that next year. Their record after 10 games was 5-5, and then it fell off. And it fell off to start the season, too. So they lost, 4 of their first 5, and then they won 4 of the next 5. And then they dropped to 8-11-1 after 20 games. After 30 games, they were 12-16-2. And then it's at game 37 that they get shut down for about a month. And they were 16-18-3 when they were shut down. When they came out of the shutdown, they ended up 7-11-1 after. And they won a couple of games against Toronto coming out of it, and it looked like, hey, this can be great. And then they only won 5 games after that. So by 40 games, they're 18-19-3, and they got to 500 at 19-19-3, and then it all falls off again. They end up 21-26-3 after 50, and 23-29-4 after 56 games. Their home record, 13-12-3. Their road record, 10-17-1. And so for Vancouver, there are a lot of unknowns about what's going to happen going into next season. And the fact they only have $15 million in cap space, which sounds like a ton. And I keep seeing people saying, well, I don't know why. Nobody should be worried about cap space. They have $15 million next year. What are people talking about? Well, Pettersson and Hughes, let's just ballpark and say they both take $5 million a year. Now you've got $5 million left to replace a bunch of players who are either not signed, restricted free agents, or when those UFAs leave, you have to replace them with somebody. So you're leaving yourself $5 million to fill the rest of the roster. And that's only if they take $5 million each. And I don't see them taking $5 million each. So that's going to be an issue, and that's why they're looking at buyouts. That's why they'll be looking probably to Seattle to make a trade. And I just have this horrible feeling about maybe they take Roussel and they take him in a first-round draft pick and trade him to Seattle. And then they lose, say, Gadjevic in the expansion draft. So that's one scenario just pops into my head right off the top of it. So I do worry about them using first-round draft picks to try to get themselves out of this cap situation, which works fine if your team is a contender. It works fine if you're Toronto and you know you're going to be in the playoffs every year. But if your team is looking at that record and then you're trying to pay somebody with top draft picks in order to take some money off your hands, that's an issue. And it's an issue that most of the teams at the bottom of the league don't have. So the record against teams in their division this year, 3-5-2 against Calgary. Last season they were 1-2 against Calgary. 4-6 against Edmonton. Last season they were 2-2 against Edmonton. Against Montreal, 3-5-1, and that run against Montreal was awful. And last year they were 1-1 against Montreal. Against Ottawa they ended up 6-3, which flatters them because they started at 4-0. And then last year they were 1-1 against Ottawa. Against Toronto, they were 4-5. Last year, they were 0-2 against Toronto. Against Winnipeg, they were 3-5-1. They were 0-2 against Winnipeg last year. The only team they had a good record against was Ottawa, and that was only because you had to include those first 4 games. If you judged it based on the rest of the season, they were below 500 against Ottawa as well. So there are issues here. There are some issues, but that 5-10 record against the other teams in Canada last season, 2019-2020, keep that in mind because their record was actually decent. So playing against teams from California, playing against Arizona helped them, and their overall record against other divisions wasn't awful. So maybe getting back to an 82-game schedule and getting back to some sort of regularity will help Vancouver. So yeah. If we expected me to have the longest video in this series based on the Vancouver Canucks, well, that would make a lot of sense. I've followed the Canucks very closely for a long time, and there are a lot of things to dissect here about where the team goes from here. I don't think it's that bad. I don't think there needs to be massive changes. When I see people talking about massive trades with the Canucks and trading out guys like Besser, I'm thinking that's crazy. Besser showed this year that he's a hard worker, and he was the most consistent Canuck. Even when he wasn't scoring goals, I thought he was a really good player out there. So I don't see anybody from the core being moved, and I think that adding Podkolzin could help. But I really don't know if this is going to be a playoff team next year. And if they're not, I would expect both coach and GM to go. However, the big old asterisk, I would have expected them to go this year too. And it didn't happen. So buckle up, because I really think that we're not going to see any changes in Vancouver unless next year is somehow worse than this year and all of that wonderful stuff. But I'll always watch them. I'll always cheer for them. And I will always understand that when they go on these runs, and this is a 2020 playoff hat that I'm wearing, so it's got 2020 playoffs on it, enjoy the run while it lasts, because you never know when it's going to come back. So that's what I did last fall when they went on that nice run, and then Vegas knocks them out. And that's my intention again, should that ever happen again, which never assume, because it's Vancouver. But let me know your thoughts in the comments section below regarding the Vancouver Canucks moving forward, and how to solve all of this. So if you bring back Edler for $2 million, you then have $13 million left in cap space for Pettersson and Hughes. You sign Sutter for $1.5 million. Well, now you're down to about $11 million. Like, it's just, that money's going to go fast. So who gets bought out? Who gets traded? All that other wonderful stuff. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. If you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.